Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for being here today. Today, the Military Personnel Subcommittee and the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee continue their oversight of actions to improve the operation and sustainment of the Arlington National Cemetery, a national shrine which indicates our sincere appreciation of service members, military families, and veterans. The testimony today is based on reports directed by the Congress and delivered in December by the Army and the Government Accounting Office. In general, both reports reflect substantial improvement in a number of areas of management and contracting execution. That progress reflects not only the personal commitment of our former colleague, Secretary John McHugh, but also the professionalism and commitment of Ms. Catherine Condon, the Executive Director of the Army National Cemeteries Program, and Mr. Patrick Hallinan, the Superintendent of Arlington Cemetery. As I look at the issues that still must need to be addressed, these two appear to rise above all the rest. First, what is the corrective action and funding that will be required to resolve the nearly 14,000 critical deficiencies cited in the Arlington Grave Accountability Effort? And second, should the Department of Veterans Affairs assume responsibility for Arlington National Cemetery and the cemetery at the Soldiers' Home here in the District of Columbia? Before I introduce our witnesses, let me recognize in turn Representative Susan Davis, the ranking member of the Military Personnel Subcommittee, and Chairman Rob Whitman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, and Mr. Jim Cooper, the ranking member of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, for any opening remarks they might wish to make.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the hearing today. General Vangel, I wanted to welcome you. I understand you recently took over from General McCoy as the Army Inspector General. Ms. Martin and Mr. Lepore, I look forward to hearing the Government Accountability Office assessment of the Army's efforts with respect to Arlington. And Ms. Condon, welcome back. We've had a chance to see each other quite a bit, and I really appreciate your efforts. Arlington National Cemetery, as we all know, is one of the most hallowed grounds of this nation, and we must hold it to the highest standards of performance. Members of the Subcommittee on Military Personnel, in conjunction with the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, are interested in the actions taken by the Army to improve its accountability of Arlington National Cemetery since our hearing in September. Ms. Condon, I recognize the hard work you and Mr. Hallinan have done to turn around the cemetery, and I know that you could not have done it alone. There are probably a number of people that should be acknowledged for their efforts that cannot all be recognized here today. But I do believe that there is still more to be done to ensure that we maintain and build upon the achievements that have been made, and to ensure, above all, accountability of those who are involved in the missteps at Arlington National Cemetery. Ms. Martin and Mr. Lepore, I'm interested in learning from the GAO what issues and concerns should the committee be aware of as the Army works to develop a strategic plan for Arlington. What signs, if any, should we be tracking as the Army moves forward on its efforts to continue to improve Arlington? And I would also like to hear your thoughts on what concerns we should be aware of if there is an effort to transfer the management of Arlington from the Army to the Veterans Administration. General Vangel, I would be interested in the IG's perspective on Arlington and what can be done to build upon the improvements that have recently been made. Thank you all for being here. This is an important issue and one that touches all who serve our nation in uniform. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ranking Member. And Chairman Whitman.
Panel members, welcome. I want to thank my co-chair, Chairman Joe Wilson, and our ranking members, Jim Cooper and Susan Davis, for their steadfast commitment and their focus on this extraordinarily important issue. It's been an honor to work with you over the months, and we look forward as we continue along this journey of making sure that collectively we all do what is necessary to make sure Arlington maintains its rightful place in honoring this nation's heroes. I'd also like to extend a very warm welcome to General Vangel. Thank you so much for your leadership and for your oversight of Arlington. We know it's a new challenge for you, but know one that you're ready and up to the task. Ms. Condon, I want to thank you and your team who have met with us on a monthly basis to keep us apprised of progress. We appreciate your dedication. We know it's been a long, arduous journey with more steps to come. I'd like to also highlight my appreciation for what you do in total for the Army, what you've done through your career and what you have done to this point. Army leadership has done a lot to change the culture and climate at Arlington, and I also want to thank Secretary McHugh. He is a person of steadfast devotion on getting this issue solved. He's certainly a man of his word. He said early on that this was going to be his focus. I admire him for that focus, for his commitment, for his dedication to make sure that Arlington, again, goes back to its rightful place in honoring this nation's heroes. So I want to thank the Secretary for that. This was an organization that was characterized by deficiencies and mismanagement that has since been transformed into a stable, functioning, and professional organization that is finally setting a new standard for how we care for our fallen heroes. Mr. Brian Lepore and Ms. Belva Martin, thank you for coming. We appreciate your efforts there at the GAO, and we know, as always, the GAO does an excellent job, and we appreciate your service. We're here today for two very important reasons. First, to figure out what progress has been made with respect to accountability issues at Arlington, and to determine what challenges remain that need to be addressed moving forward. I've said many times how important it is to me personally that we work to achieve 100% accountability, and the Army has done a great job with helping us get there with the Grave Site Accountability Task Force. Validating almost 200,000 grave sites was difficult and challenging, but you, your staff, and the old guard got it done. However, I do remain concerned about a number of issues. First, the lack of accountability with respect to former officials for their misconduct. It's my understanding that no criminal action has been taken and that investigations are ongoing and open. I find this very, very difficult to believe and unacceptable, and I will continue to follow this very closely. Second, despite the great amount of time that has elapsed since initial allegations came to light, management and contracting issues persist at Arlington. To highlight just a few, I'm concerned about the GAO's findings regarding the lack of a strategic plan, the lack of IT organizational architecture, which call into question whether we're effectively and efficiently spending taxpayers' dollars at the cemetery when millions of dollars have already been spent. I hope this panel will address these issues, and I also hope you'll tell us what progress has been made and what you believe we will find in finally trying to resolve these remaining matters. We cannot close the door on this terrible chapter in Arlington until all of these issues are resolved. We owe it to our nation's heroes who have sacrificed their lives on our behalf and continue to make this a top priority. And as you've done in the past, we need to get this done. And we owe it to our future generations of heroes who deserve the honor of being buried here and knowing that Arlington is again assuming its rightful place as the hallmark of honoring this nation's heroes. Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have no opening statement.
And at this time, we'll proceed with our witnesses. The order would be Lieutenant General Peter M. Bangel, the Inspector General of the U.S. Army. Next would be Ms. Belva Martin, Director, Acquisition and Sourcing Management Team, U.S. Government Accountability Office. And third, we would have Mr. Brian J. Lepore, Director of Defense Capabilities and Management, U.S. Government Accountability Office. And fourth and finally, we would have Ms. Catherine Condon, who is the Executive Director of the Army's National Cemeteries Program. And so, General, thank you for beginning.
Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Davis, Chairman Whitman, Ranking Member Cooper, and distinguished members of the subcommittees, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, and thank you for your oversight and support over the past 18 months. It has made a difference at Arlington National Cemetery. Since assuming the duties of the Army Inspector General in November, I have reviewed our previous inspections, met with the Executive Director and her team, and other stakeholders who have been involved in correcting the deficiencies found at Arlington. I think to fully appreciate the progress that has been made, one only has to review the 2010 IG report, which identified 61 deficiencies, among them being a deplorable organizational climate, archaic record-keeping and automation systems, uncontrolled contracting and budgeting processes, and significant problems with gravesite accountability. In contrast, You may recall from General McCoy's testimony that the 2011 IG report identified no deficiencies and noted significant progress at the cemetery, largely due to the course set by the Secretary of the Army's Directive 2010-04, the efforts of the Executive Director and her team, and the support from the Department of the Army staff. In short, the mismanagement reported to you in the June 2010 IG report has been relegated to the past, and Arlington is beginning to transition from successful crisis management to sustained excellence. Allow me to just share a few specifics. The previous insular environment that contributed to mismanagement and substandard performance at Arlington has improved significantly. The Executive Director has established a positive work environment, emphasizing cooperation, collaboration, and coordination. Workforce surveys taken as part of the 2011 inspection did reflect steadily improving morale, unity, and organizational effectiveness. The cemetery now possesses a functional information technology infrastructure supported by a service agreement with the Army's Information Technology Agency. Arlington has leveraged the agency's Consolidated Customer Service Center to more effectively monitor and respond to customer calls, which is increasing customer service. A new computer application for digitizing burial records has been critical in establishing the accountability baseline for each gravesite and interment-ish. In the contracting arena, new acquisitions are subjected to rigorous analysis, pre-award compliance checks, and contract packet reviews for quality assurance. While we still noted some deficiencies and errors within contracts, the number was significantly less than 2010, mostly administrative in documentation. Arlington now works closely with the Office of the Administrative Assistant and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management to ensure improved oversight of the cemetery's budget formulation and execution. The transition to the General Fund Enterprise Business System has provided full visibility and transparency of cemetery expenditures. Finally, with respect to improvements, the Executive Director has recently published a campaign plan which includes major efforts to complete gravesite accountability, complete the documentation of policies and procedures, and address long-term expansion of the cemetery. It assigns responsibilities for these and other tasks as well, with metrics and timelines to measure progress. While these developments are encouraging, there is still much more work to do. The 2011 Army IG inspection report provided 53 recommendations for continued improvement at Arlington. I'll highlight a few required key actions. First of all, Arlington's leadership and the Army must finish updating relevant policies and regulations. Further, the Arlington leadership must complete the documentation and validation of internal oversight processes and controls. The recent work to establish the gravesite accountability baseline must continue to resolve the nearly 47,000 cases that remain. The Executive Director must coordinate with the Army staff to establish and document enduring external oversight processes to prevent the recurrence of past shortcomings. The Department of the Army must also finalize and implement enduring jurisdictional, organizational, and support relationships of the Army National Cemeteries program. As we look to our inspection this summer, we intend to conduct assessments in several areas. First of all, compliance with Army Directive 2010-04, progress addressing the recommendations from our 2011 report, compliance with the Executive Director's campaign plan, the gravesite accountability process validation, and we're collaborating with the Army Audit Agency, the VA, and the United States Army Force Management Support Agency for their participation as well in this year's inspection. In conclusion, Arlington remains a priority for the Secretary and for the Army. The significant progress observed by the Army IG validates the Secretary's approach to creating the processes, systems, and management that we found to be lacking at Arlington in 2010. This strategy, executed according to the Executive Director's campaign plan with the support of the Army, the Defense Department, other federal agencies, and Congress, has set the conditions for continued improvement and ultimately sustained excellence. Thank you once again for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to answering your questions and working with the committees in the future. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General, thank you very much. And Ms. Belva Martin.
Chairman Wilson and Whitman, Ranking Members Davis and Cooper, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you to discuss GAO's work at Arlington. Our reviews found that Arlington has taken significant actions to address its problems and that the path forward, as you stated, Chairman Wilson, is for Arlington to sustain progress through improved management and oversight. My colleague, Mr. Lepore, will discuss GAO's work on management issues. On the contracting side, GAO identified 56 active contracts over $100,000 that supported cemetery operations, construction and facility maintenance, and new efforts to enhance IT systems for the automation of burial operations. Arlington does not have its own contracting authority, but relies on relationships with contracting offices to award and manage its contracts. These contracting authorities obligated roughly $35.2 million in support of the 56 contracts that were included in our review. And as the IG has noted, the Army has taken a number of positive steps since June 2010 at different levels to provide for more effective management and oversight of contracts, including improving contracting policies and practices, establishing new support relationships, formalizing policies and procedures, and increasing the use of dedicated contracting staff to manage and improve its acquisitions. However, GAO found 3 areas at Arlington where additional improvements are needed. First, maintaining complete data on contracts. Second, defining responsibilities for contracting support. And third, determining contract staffing needs. I will briefly summarize key findings in these 3 areas. First, with respect to maintaining complete data, when we did our review, we were able to pull together information on Arlington contracts from various sources, including support organizations, but there were shortcomings with each of these sources. To be able to identify, track, and ensure the effective management and oversight of its contracts, Arlington leadership needs complete data on all contracts. Second, with respect to support relationships, the Army has taken a number of steps to better align Arlington contract support with the expertise of its partners. For example, Arlington has agreements with the Army Information Technology Agency, ITA, and the Army Analytics Group to help manage its IT infrastructure. While these agreements spell out the services that ITA will provide to Arlington and performance metrics against which ITA will be measured, these are all very positive steps. These agreements do not specifically address ITA's contract management roles and responsibilities in support of Arlington requirements. Although officials told us that they were aware of their roles and responsibilities, the question is, what happens when personnel change? Going forward, sustained attention on the part of Arlington and its partners will be important to ensure that contracts of all types and risk levels are managed effectively. Third, with respect to dedicated contract staffing arrangements, 3 contract specialist positions have been identified for Arlington but have not been filled. Arlington is presently receiving support from Fort Belvoir Contracting Office in the form of 10 positions, 5 funded by Arlington and 5 by Fort Belvoir. Arlington officials have identified the need for a more senior contracting specialist and are developing plans to fill this new position in FY13. In closing, the success of the Army's efforts to improve contracting and management at the cemetery will depend on management's sustained attention and efforts to institutionalize positive steps taken to date. Accordingly, we made a number of recommendations in our December 2011 report to improve contract management and oversight in the 3 areas where we found shortcomings. For the most part, DoD agreed with our findings and that there is a need to take actions and provided timeframes for doing so. We will continue to monitor their progress. Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, this concludes my short statement. I will be happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Martin. We now have Mr. Brian Lepore.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Wilson, Ranking Member Davis, Chairman Whitman, and Ranking Member Cooper, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to present our findings from our review of oversight and management of Arlington National Cemetery. As you know, we issued our report on the management and oversight of Arlington on December 15th of last year. My testimony is based on our report, and I will make 2 points today. First, I'll discuss the policies and procedures that the current leadership team at Arlington has put into place to begin to address the deficiencies that became apparent, and I'll identify some of our recommendations to help assist in that endeavor. And secondly, I'll discuss some factors that could potentially affect the feasibility and advisability of transferring Arlington from the Army to the Department of Veterans Affairs, the VA. Here's the bottom line. I think it is fair to say the current leadership team at Arlington has taken many positive steps at the cemetery to address the deficiencies and make improvements. The Army has made progress in a range of areas, including chain of custody procedures to ensure proper accountability over remains, better providing information assurance, and improving procedures to address inquiries from the families and the public. However, we believe some steps are still needed to ensure that these changes are institutionalized and will prove lasting for the long term, long after the spotlight has faded. Therefore, we've made recommendations in 6 areas. First, we believe they should complete the enterprise architecture to guide new investments in information technology to ensure the investments are aligned with the future operational requirements. Second, an updated workforce plan to ensure the workforce is properly sized and trained. Third, an internal assessment program to gauge how the cemetery is doing and making any improvements that may be warranted. Fourth, improving coordination with the cemetery's operational partners, the Military District of Washington, the Military Honor Guards, and Joint Base Meyer-Henderson Hall to ensure, for example, that scheduling conflicts are avoided and the right honor guards are available when needed. Fifth, a strategic plan or campaign plan with expected outcomes, performance metrics, and milestones. And sixth, written policies explaining how to assist the families when such assistance is warranted. The cemetery leadership has generally concurred with our recommendations and has begun to implement them. We are encouraged by this. Now my final point, the question of the feasibility and advisability of transferring Arlington from the Army to the VA. It's certainly feasible. As you know, Congress transferred more than 80 national cemeteries managed by the Army to the VA in the 1970s. However, several factors could affect the advisability of this. Such a change can have potential costs and benefits challenges, it can lead to certain transition challenges, and can affect the characteristics that make Arlington unique among our national cemeteries. Thus, it may be premature to change jurisdiction right now since the Army has significantly improved its management of Arlington. Here are some of the specific challenges that could arise in a jurisdictional change. First, simply identifying the goals of the transfer. Second, the Army and the VA have their own staff, processes, and systems to determine burial eligibility and scheduling and managing burials. As an example, Arlington has more restrictive eligibility for in-ground burials than the VA. Third, Arlington's appropriation structure is different than the VA's, and should you make a jurisdictional change, the Congress may wish to review that and determine what's the right course of action. Fourth, Arlington provides military funeral honors, but the VA does not. Fifth, Arlington hosts many special ceremonies every year, some involving the President and visiting heads of state. And sixth, Arlington is one of the most visited tourist destinations in Washington, hosting over 4 million visitors a year. Finally, we do think opportunities exist for the Army and the VA to collaborate more for the mutual benefit of both organizations, but most importantly, for the benefit of our active duty service members, our veterans, and their families. Here are some examples. VA has staff dedicated to establishing eligibility for burial in their cemeteries and a central scheduling center that could assist Arlington. Conversely, VA officials are examining whether geographic information system or global positioning system technology should be used in their cemeteries, but the Army already does this and could conceivably provide assistance to the VA. Since no formal mechanism exists yet to identify collaboration opportunities, we recommended that the two departments establish one, and they agreed. In conclusion, we believe the Army has worked through the crisis and taken steps to put Arlington National Cemetery on a sustainable path to ensure effective cemetery operations. Our recommendations are offered in the spirit of assisting that process along so that we never have to come before you again to have this conversation. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my prepared remarks, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you or the other members of the subcommittee may have.
Thank you, Director Lepore, and I want to thank Director Martin. Both of you were very helpful, and I even appreciated your final comment that you didn't want to have to come back. So that's truly, you're helping make that possible. So thank you. The Arlington Executive Director, Ms. Catherine Condon.
Chairman Wilson, Chairman Whitman, and distinguished members of both subcommittees. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss the progress that we have made at Arlington National Cemetery. As both of the Chairman and Ranking Member Davis and Cooper both know from our monthly updates, there still is a lot of work left that we have to do at Arlington. But the Army and the entire cemetery are prepared to address the challenges that remain. But today, significant progress has been made. Progress as a result of our concerted focus on establishing repeatable standards, measures, and operating procedures that emphasize safety, proficiency, professionalism, and accountability. The implementation of state-of-the-art technology now make the hallowed grounds of Arlington one of the most technologically advanced cemeteries in the country. A different perspective than 19 months ago, when the cemetery lacked fiscal stewardship, was a paper-based operation using a typewriter and having only one fax machine, when calls were not answered, and the workforce was not properly manned, trained, or equipped. But practicing sound fiscal stewardship and displaying transparency in cemetery operations is paramount in our effort to restore the faith, trust, and honor our veterans and their families so rightfully deserve. A formal chain of custody process has been implemented to maintain positive, verifiable control of remains throughout both the interment and inurnment process at the cemetery. And we have reviewed years of financial records and recovered funds, $26.8 million to be exact, funds that were fully used to fully fund, as you know, Mr. Chairman Whitman, the construction of the 9th Columbarium, and to make the necessary improvements to years of backlogs of maintenance and repair. You have my commitment that we will continue to examine prior year funding records to see if there are more dollars that can be recovered to put back into Arlington. In the accountability report recently submitted to this Congress, we have examined and photographed 259,978 grave sites, markers, and niches. And the Accountability Task Force compiled those photos and coupled them with our existing records. And for the first time, we now have consolidated 147 years of cemetery records, records that were created from logbook entries, our paper-based records of interment and grave cards that we used to have in our interment scheduling branch but are no longer there, and the automated records that we did have. And we now have them into a single accountable database. Since the submission of the report, the total validated grave sites without any burial discrepancies in evidence is now 212,674. And we are working diligently to continue to close the remaining 18% of the cases to bring our efforts on accountability to closure. The creation of the single, complete, verifiable database will soon allow families and other stakeholders with Internet access to search and produce a picture of each and every marker in the cemetery and to review that with publicly available information pertaining to each grave site. They can do this on our state-of-the-art website and soon-to-be smartphone application that we will be launching to the public. In the area of contracting, we have made significant progress in contract management, transforming our contracting activities to position the Army National Cemeteries program for long-term sustainment. The Army has resourced our contracting support and oversight, adding skilled acquisition support personnel to support my staff, and properly training the workforce involved in the acquisition process. In order to orchestrate the many activities required to effectively run Arlington, we have developed the Army National Cemetery's campaign plan, which codifies in one strategic document the long-term vision for the operation of the cemetery at both Arlington and the Soldier and Airman's Home. It is the vehicle that the Superintendent, Pat Hallinan, and I will use to ensure that we do achieve our future vision for the cemetery. It incorporates the significant guidance, support, and recommendations we have received from Secretary McHugh, from the GAO, from the Army Inspector General, from the Army Audit Agency, from the Northern Virginia Technology Council, and from distinguished members of Congress, in particular members of this committee. Coupled with the campaign plan, we are developing our enterprise architecture and technology acquisition roadmap, which will serve as our IT blueprint and ensure our IT investments are effectively and efficiently meeting the needs of the organization well into the future. In conclusion, I personally wish to thank both committees again for your leadership and monthly guidance as we restore honor and dignity to Arlington National Cemetery. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. And at this time, we'll proceed to questions from each member of both of the subcommittees. And we will be on a strict 5-minute rule. This will be upheld by Mr. John Chapla, who is a professional staff member of the Armed Services Committee, and above reproach. He is very good about keeping the 5-minute rule, including with both chairmen. And at this time, I'd like to ask Ms. Condon, first of all, it's exciting, and I hope people do hear the good news that you can access records now by the Internet. As a person who has a direct family member there, it means a lot to me as a citizen of our country and also as a member of Congress. In your report, you have identified that more than 57,000 grave discrepancies still have to be resolved. I'd like for you to focus on what the most serious are, in particular the 14,000 critical discrepancies. What is the corrective action timeline and funding required to address the critical deficiencies?
Mr. Chairman, in our accountability, what we have done is we started the process with business rules. In one of our business rules, to match the photo that the old guard took of each and every gravesite and niche, was that we had to match that with at least 2 records. Most of those 14,000 discrepancies, which are really not discrepancies per se, means that we didn't have 2 records. We only had 1 record. We're finding that from the Civil War, we only had 1 document, which is the document in the handwritten transcribed logbook. But what our accountability task force did, and they ended at the 22nd of December, but we now have 45 analysts. Most of them are temporary employees who have dedicated themselves to looking at the Social Security Death Index, to look at census data, to look at military records, to go on Ancestry.com to make sure that we could find another record so that we could validate the information that we have on the gravesite and headstone. And that incorporates most of what that 14,000 is.
Well, that's very creative, and I'm delighted to hear that. Additionally, there have been press reports that $12 million was previously appropriated funds could not be found, and then you've indicated that you've recovered $26.8 million. Could you tell us how the recovery was done, whether there are any other unobligated funds still to be found, and how is this situation of unobligated funds to be prevented in the future?
Well, sir, I can first start by talking how the $12 million came about. On page 15 of Ms. Martin's GAO report on contracting, they cited a 2010 Army audit that said that $15 million of unliquidated obligations was recovered. So if you take the total of the amount that we have found and subtract the $15 million, you get $12 million that they said was unaccounted for. Sir, that was not unaccounted for. We recovered all of that $26.8 million because the IG reports, the Army audit reports, and the GAO reports were all snapshots in time. And that data, we were continuing to recover those funds. How did the staff, my resource management staff, has been working meticulously to look at each and every contract to make sure that we close out those contracts and recover funds, and to also look at each and every, MIPR, which is when you give money out to an organization to provide support, to make sure that we close out and bring back those dollars. That is how we were able to recoup the $26 million that we found.
Well, I want to congratulate you. I can't imagine recovering that much money, and so I'm very, very pleased. For everyone, and it can be very brief since my time is brief, should the Department of Veterans Affairs assume responsibility for Arlington National Cemetery and the cemetery at the Soldiers' Home here in the District of Columbia? And we'll begin this time with General Vangel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that we need to take a good look at this, and a more detailed look. I concur with what the GAO has brought up already. As I take a look at it, I think, though, that right now the Army should keep it, and the bottom line is collaboration is probably better at this point, at least for the next few years, and then we'll take another look, and we'll do whatever the President and Congress want us to do.
Thank you.
I will defer to my colleague.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, we noted it in our report. Given the progress the Army has made, and given the potential short-term costs of actually doing a transfer, it seemed to us that it might be more prudent to give the Army a chance to see if they can complete their progress and bring this through to a successful conclusion. And you'll have a pretty good idea how they do when General Vangel and his team come back in later this year. So it seemed to us that right now making that decision might be a little premature.
Thank you. And Ms. Condon.
Chairman Wilson, I'm not going to answer this parochially. My job was to put in place to fix Arlington for our veterans and their loved ones. The decision on where Arlington is placed, all I can tell you, sir, is where if it is transferred, you will have a fixed, much improved Arlington.
Well, thank you all, and we now proceed to the ranking member, Susan Davis of San Diego, California.
Thank you. To you, General Vangel, if you were to give Arlington a grade right now, what would that be?
I've had a chance to go down and essentially talk to some people, and I've looked at some past reports. I haven't had a chance to look at it in depth like I'm going to do this summer with the inspection team as we go down. What I can say is that as being deployed for the past 2 years, as I heard what was going on at Arlington, I'd have to give them a 0. With what I heard, I have to be honest with you, because it's just not something. It was inconceivable that was happening, because what I saw was that there were very respectful ceremonies. Everything it seemed to be going well. I will say, though, that looking at the progress that's been made, and I, as I say, I go back and look at the reports that the Department of the Army IG has done. There have been 2 now. There has been significant progress. So if you're asking me to put it on a number scale, ma'am, that would be difficult for me to do at this point, because I don't usually give 10s. So I'd have to say that they're probably around they're better than 5.
Mm-hmm. Of what you know, and certainly from the testimony today, one of the things I kept hearing was about staffing issues and making sure that the issues around that are really sustained, so that no matter who's there, that those issues are addressed. Is that one that would certainly improve their grade, or is there anything else that really stands out to you from all that's been said?
In 2010, we identified the fact that the staff wasn't robust enough to be able to do the jobs that they were being asked to do, particularly from an oversight function. We recommended that the Army Force Management Support Agency and the United States Army Manpower Analysis Agency come down, take a look. They did. They made recommendations, and the Secretary of the Army authorized an increase of about 63 personnel, I believe. And Ms. Condon has been hiring folks. I don't believe she's got them all yet. I defer to her for the actual status. But in my mind, it's the documentation of SOPs, internal process controls. If I had to say what really, in my mind, influences the score, if you will, The service to the families is remarkable. They're doing a good job with that. Ceremonies have always been done well. In fact, in one circumstance, you could argue that the fact that they were done well caused a lack of oversight in some other areas. There was an assumption that everything was okay. And as you take a look at that, though, I think at the end of the day, it really is about establishing, documenting, and routinizing these processes that they've made so much progress with so far. But it's all about making sure that the SOPs match execution right now. And
thank you.
That's where we're at.
Thank you very much. Ms. Martin, you mentioned in your testimony the need for contracting specialists and certainly for senior staffers as well. And I'm just wondering, what do you think is a reasonable time frame to if we look back 6 months from, or look forward 6 months from now, should those issues be addressed by then, or should it be 3 months, a year? What is reasonable to assume that a lot of these areas have been addressed?
Well, Congresswoman, I would certainly have to defer to the leadership at Arlington. To her credit, Ms. Condon has identified the need for a more senior contracting specialist, and she has taken some steps to get that in 2013. My understanding is there is a process to do that. So she has already put the steps in place. The fact that she is getting the support that she needs from Fort Belvoir at the present time is certainly a positive, but our point would be that at some point, if there's another urgent need within the Army, that support may not be there for Arlington. So as we've been saying, that it's important, again, to put the policies, procedures, have the right people in place in order to sustain. So sustainment, again, is the key. But Ms. Condon has certainly, and her team have certainly taken the steps to identify what she needs and to hopefully bring those people on board.
Thank you. Ms. Condon, what do you think is a reasonable time frame to come back and be sure that, let's 6 months, is that reasonable, or 3 months? What is reasonable?
6 months is fair. Ma'am, we're currently in the process of hiring that senior contracting professional to be personally on my staff. The reason why I'm very comfortable with the agreement we have now with the Army Contracting Command with having them provide our contracting support, because that means that we have trained acquisition professionals who are in the acquisition chain, so that I will make sure that they have the right training, the right credentials, the right levels of certification, and the right warrants, because Arlington really isn't that large of an organization to have a large contracting structure embedded in our TDA. So if I have the one senior professional on the staff personally and then reach back to the contracting command for support, I think that will satisfy the contracting oversight and requirements that we will need at the cemetery.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Ms. Davis. And we proceed now to Chairman Rob Whitman of Virginia.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Martin, I want to begin with you. I find it interesting in the report you speak about contract management and deficiencies there at Arlington with contract management, specifically in the area of IT. It appears as though about $5 million spent in IT contracts that appear to be wasteful and that haven't produced any results. And on page 9 of the report, you've said that the IT contract management system is not guided by a modernization blueprint and that it's duplicative, poorly integrated, and unnecessarily costly to maintain. From that standpoint, what did your review uncover in specific terms about why you believe that was occurring, as well as what are the current efforts to overcome those deficiencies? Where are they in this modernization effort to make sure there is not duplication and that systems aren't unduly costly to maintain those efforts?
Thank you, Chairman, for the question, and it actually spans both of the reports. The external reviews found that the over $5 million that had been spent to try to modernize the IT systems really didn't get us very much. And there were a number of reasons, starting from some basic stuff like the people who were executing the contracts were not properly trained and did not have the right experience. And Ms. Condon kind of referred to the importance of doing that upfront planning for contracts. And a couple of the systems really did not get us very much in terms of trying to modernize. As as a part of the mandate, we were required to look at 5 particular systems that were called out. And what we found is that 2 of these systems are active, and those 2 are the interment scheduling system and the geographic information system. That's the one that Ms. Condon and my colleague referred to be able to use GPS to do the mapping, et cetera. One system is in use, the BOSS system, and that's a VA system, so it's not really an Arlington contract, but Arlington does use that system to order the headstones and the grave markers, but there's no payment to VA under that contract. And then the last 2, the interment management system and the total cemetery management system, are the ones that we basically got nothing for in terms of the monies that were spent. So there were a number of reasons in terms of the contracts not having the specific, again, oversight, the deliverables not being very clear, documentation, planning, oversight. So it spanned the gamut in terms of things that you would not want to do for contracts. And so in the Oversight and Management Report, we made some specific recommendations in terms of having an architecture, and Mr. Lepore can talk a bit more about that.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the point that my colleague Ms. Martin is making is we had made the point in our report that the cemetery staff took some very reasonable initial steps to deal with sort of immediate deficiencies, ensuring you've got a good firewall and virus protection and some pretty fundamental stuff, probably things that needed to be done urgently, very reasonable steps. Our point then was, as the cemetery staff begins to transition to putting the organization on a long-term sustainable path, having a good plan that ties the future operational environment back to the technology investments will be needed, or what we call an enterprise architecture, would be an important step to make sure that for the long term the cemetery is on a sustainable path. They've begun that process and expect to complete it later this year.
Let me follow up on that long-term sustainable path. You also point out in the report that there is a lack of a strategic plan, and it seems like to me an organization can't get to where it needs to be without a clear vision that's stated in the strategic plan. Can you tell me where you believe the deficiencies lie as far as not having that plan, what that means, and really where the organization there at Arlington needs to go with that plan?
Yes, I'd be happy to. When we did the work, the plan, there wasn't a plan at that time. I mean, it turns out that the cemetery was working on one. Just a couple of weeks ago, really, we saw for the first time the Army's campaign plan, as they call it, that's their jargon. Okay, good enough. And among the kinds of things we look for in a strategic plan is goals and objectives, where you're trying to take the organization, performance metrics, so you have some way of knowing, did I get there or not, and milestones that sort of force you. It's sort of a forcing action to help you get there, and then a process to go back and look at yourself and figure out, did I get where I need to go? We just saw the campaign plan for the first time a couple of weeks ago. Ms. Condon and her staff were gracious enough to share it with us. So we haven't had a chance to fully review it yet since we just got it, but I can tell you it does seem to have the basic fundamentals that we would look for in such a plan.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you back?
Thank you, Chairman Whitman. And we now proceed to Ranking Member Jim Cooper of Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The title of this hearing is an update on accountability at Arlington National Cemetery. I'm worried that we're hearing a whole lot more about accounting and bureaucracy than we are hearing about accountability. When I talk to folks back home, they think accountability means that somebody was in charge and they had to account for what they did or did not do while they were in charge. And we're not hearing much about that. And to refresh everybody's memory, in July, August of 2009, the newspaper, the Washington Post, discovered irregularities at the cemetery. I think it was June 2010, almost a year later, the Secretary of the Army responded. You know, we've had a hearing in 11, now it's 12. We are years into this, and to my knowledge, not one person, either military or civilian, has been punished in any way for one of the worst scandals in the 150-year history of Arlington National Cemetery. Now, as this was going on, we've learned from the news media that the Air Force has apparently improperly disposed of the remains, the ashes of over 200 airmen and women. And to my knowledge, there's been no accountability there either. Now, that's a newer scandal. But what is going on here? And I love your new systems, and I think accountants are great, and I love software, and record keeping is great, but we must remember this is a core function of the U.S. military and has been since the founding of the services. There is no more premier location than Arlington. And no reprimand, no punishment, no accountability. We haven't even, and in this hearing at least, identified the folks to be held accountable. And I love looking forward, and I love optimism, and I do think great progress has been made by the current folks. But how do I look folks in the eye back home and say there's been accountability? And when you talk about whether it should be an Army or a VA facility, who in the Army was in charge? And this is way beyond the realm of the GAO and folks like that, and you're excellent witnesses, and I appreciate the limits on your supervision. But this hearing is about accountability at Arlington. And the best I can tell, there is none, at least in terms of holding the wrongdoers accountable. So what are we going to do about this? This is years into the investigation. Members of Congress don't run for office hoping to hold investigative hearings on cemetery accountability. Presumably, this will be handled responsibly, but I'm getting tired of waiting years into the investigation. Now, I want to be fair to all involved, but this is years have passed. Is it going to take 3 years to find out what happened to the ashes of the airmen that were apparently dumped in a dumpster? What is going on here? So I hope that these committees will not be part of any sweeping under the rug, any whitewash. But as the years click by, shouldn't there be not just an accounting, but accountability? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As you know, I did not take an opening statement. I did not want to stress the committee here, but I think we have more work to do in this area.
Thank you very much for your inquiries, which certainly need to be addressed. At this time, we have Mr. Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Cooper's a hard act to follow. I am a CPA, and I'm trying to figure out the record-keeping process, which I do think is core to some of the stuff that went on. The report went through an era-based model where the various eras, and starting in '99, there's something called the BOSS system. It's, I guess, a VA cemetery system. And did you have anybody look at kind of the state of the art for, I mean, there are people who control cemeteries and burials, you know, all over the United States, and there is a full industry of that does it. There's nothing unique about handling remains and burying folks to the military, other than we honor those folks a little bit more than the general. So help me understand what the current BOSS system is versus a system you'd normally find in a relatively modern cemetery operation.
Congressman Conaway, the BOSS system is the Veterans Affairs system, their burial operations scheduling system that the VA...
Which just scheduling.
It does scheduling, and it also is the system that the gravestones, the markers, are ordered from. So that is how Arlington uses the BOSS system.
All right. So it's not a, well...
It is a scheduling system that VA uses.
All right. What's ISS? Why do you have something similar?
Interment scheduling system was the scheduling system that Arlington, it was a scheduling I inherited on June 10th, and that is the scheduling system that we use at Arlington. To schedule our services. The difference between that and the BOSS system is the variables for a burial at Arlington are somewhat different. It's because you're coordinating the chapels and all the services and so forth. But Congressman Conaway, we are working with VA on the interface between the two systems that are required.
All right. Well, if BOSS is just scheduling, why do you need two?
It is the system that we don't need to. The bottom line is we need a scheduling system, but more than that, we just need accountable data. So it doesn't matter what system you use to schedule a service. It's all about the data.
Okay. So services are being held at Arlington today. Help us understand what the records look like for a particular service, and is it combination of handwritten records, or is it all automated? Is it all captured electronically, or what's the current state of affairs?
Sir, I'm very proud to state for those members of the committee who have actually been to Arlington and actually saw the paper records and the Cardex machine. Our interment scheduling branch right now does not have one paper record in it. Everything is digital. All of the records now are digital.
I understand scheduling, but somewhere in your records you keep track of who's buried where.
Yes, sir.
And those, the services being held today, and so those long-term records, once the services are done, the scheduling to make sure that the honor guard was there and everything got taken. Going forward, though, we need to keep track of who's buried where. What does that data set look like?
That data set, sir, follows the exact data that we reported in the December 22nd report to this Congress. This way forward, we will have a photo of the front and back of every gravesite and niche, and electronically attached to that will be all of the records pertaining to that service. That is how we are accounting for each and every burial, not only for the report that we did to Congress, but from this day forward. So our employees now, when a headstone is set, take the photo of the front and back of that headstone and attach that digitally to the records.
And the record is all electronic?
The record is all electronic.
So this is a little crude. Maintaining the inventory of folks who are buried where, that's fully electronic now for all new interments?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You're back.
Thank you very much. Mr. Conaway, we proceed to Mr. Quitz of Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Trying to get my arms around this. Mr. Lepore, you said that in the 70s at some point, jurisdictional responsibility for, is it every other national cemetery or any other veteran cemetery was transferred to the VA?
The Army at the time managed 82 national cemeteries, and under the 1973 National Cemeteries Act, those cemeteries transferred to the Department of what was then just the VA, now Department of Veterans Affairs, except for two. Arlington did not transfer, and the Soldiers and Airmen's Home National Cemetery here in Washington did not transfer. The Army retained those.
Okay. Is there any trouble like we're experiencing in Arlington at any of these other cemeteries?
We have not audited anybody beyond the activities at Arlington, so I really can't say. I certainly have seen some press accounts, but we have not. Our audit was focused on Arlington.
Prior to what was reported, what's that, almost 4 years ago, had there ever been an audit of Arlington's record keeping prior?
I am not aware of one by GAO. I do not know whether the Inspector General had ever done one, but we had not, to my knowledge.
Was Arlington's, we'll call it for lack of a better term, management required to report at the end of fiscal years or at any point back to the Army budgetary processes, anything that had happened during the year?
I am not aware of that, but Ms. Condon may be in a better position to answer that than I am.
Sir, Arlington, the management of Arlington, as you do your resource submit, has to report to the Department of the Army.
So, but it's just gross numbers. I mean, we had this many ceremonies, that kind of, not specifics.
It would be, from a resource standpoint, it would be the resources required to run the cemetery.
Now, going through the gravesite accountability study findings, obviously this is a complex issue. As you read through subsections that, sections within and then subsections within, that if they're not clearly marked, there's going to be issues. Do we have any recollection of anywhere before 2008, any report of we have some issues because we're finding sections that have people in them that aren't supposed to have them, or we're finding grave markers that have no people there? Is there anything prior to this 2008 sort of disaster? I guess a question would be, how long have you folks been involved in this, other than just since we started this process?
Well, sir, I can start with that one. My first day was on June 10, 2010, when Secretary McHugh created the executive director position, Mr. Cooper, to be accountable for the management and the operation of Arlington.
So everyone is pretty much just since 2008, and sir, you just came on board very recently.
Personally, yes, sir. I do know that there were operational assessments that were conducted at Arlington Cemetery based on my document research that I did as I've come on the job, 96, 97, 98 by the Military District of Washington, because they in fact had oversight responsibility at that time.
And nothing was reported in any of those reports?
Nothing that had to do with any kind of mismarked graves or accountability of graves was reported during that particular time, no, sir.
Since the digital system came on in 1999, is there any documentation of issues of mismarked graves since 1999 forward? Maybe in your audit report, is there anything? Now, prior to 1999, obviously, we have some issues because of paper records and hopefully, there's cemeteries across the country that have existed prior, but notwithstanding that, anything since 1999 when we went digital where there's been an issue?
We did not attempt to go back that far, and let me tell you, Congressman, the reason we didn't. The Graveside Accountability Task Force was in the process of reviewing all 350,000 or so records. There were some differences on what the actual number is, it turns out, but they were in the process of reviewing every record. And so it didn't seem very fruitful for us to do that work, since we already had an organization doing that. And as you know, the Graveside Accountability Task Force report was just issued late December, I believe it was.
Right, right. Well, I'm new to the committee, but obviously I'm listening to Mr. Cooper because we are talking about accountability, and we have these issues should have come up long before. I'm sure that someone knew this. This didn't just pop up since 2008, and it's interesting to me that we have no players that have been identified as having gross mismanagement of this, and I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Quitz. We proceed to Mr. Kaufman of Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for all of you for your testimony and for your service to our country. My concern as a Marine Corps combat veteran is specific to the remains of those who have been lost, particularly in Afghanistan or Iraq, and certainly anyone lost in combat. And I can remember being in Iraq that there was extraordinary care and respect paid to those that that fell on the battlefield. And where I see the breakdown, whether it's with the Air Force at Dover or the Army at Arlington, is the fact that you have civilian personnel, whether by the Army or by the Air Force, that, number one, come from a different culture where that respect may or may not be there, but is not necessarily shared, but more importantly, are not subject to the Uniform Code of Military Justice. When there is a violation of a regulation, it is in effect a lawful order, and uniformed military personnel can be prosecuted under the Uniform Code of Military Justice, where civilian personnel are not accountable to the Uniform Code of Military Justice for the violation of the same regulation. And I really think that if anything comes out of these hearings, that the chain of custody for those who have fallen in battle, that chain of custody for the remains of those who have fallen, must be by uniformed military personnel only. And because that is what is most upsetting about this, is that we're in this discussion saying, oh, things are getting better, oh, things are changing. Let me tell you this, if this all were handled, and I understand support services, and so I'm narrowly defining something that I really think ought to be changed in respect for those who have fallen on the battlefield, that I just don't believe we'd be in this situation right now, having had a career between the United States Army and the Marine Corps. We're in the kind of discussions that we've had about the kind of dereliction of duty that has befallen Arlington and Dover. I know Dover is not a part of this discussion today, but I simply don't believe we would be here today if we were dealing. Now, I understand there's a broader question. We're talking about retired military personnel. We're talking about dependents. We're talking about other things. But if there's anything that as a combat veteran that I believe must come out of these hearings, it is again that only uniformed U.S. military personnel handle the remains of those who have fallen in battle. And I would open it up if anybody would like to comment on that. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kaufman, and you raised a really good point about the UCMJ. We proceed to Mr. Runyon of New Jersey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I somewhat agree with what my colleague, Mr. Kaufman, has kind of said. I think we all agree we kind of have our arms around this, but we have to put teeth to it. We talk about accountability, and I have fortunate opportunity to actually chair the VA Subcommittee on Disability Assistance and Memorials. So I obviously have dual jurisdiction here. And we are beginning, obviously, with the Sam Houston Cemetery, experiencing some of these same pitfalls that we have here at Arlington, unfortunately. Again, the word accountability comes up time and time again. And if there are no teeth to anything we're doing, actions have consequences. No one has the fear of a consequence coming down, whether it's through contracting, whether it's through your predecessor. How do we do this? Do we do it through the contracting? Do we have to do it through legislation, through this committee? I mean, obviously, my colleague, Mr. Kaufman, has a legitimate pathway to address that issue. But I think there's multiple factors that have to be in there. But we have to hold the people accountable. That at the root of it, I think most of these problems go away. And I think also, and I think as we're moving forward, Ms. Condon, with our plan, and I know you're still building the roadmap of you can take this manual and hand it to your predecessor. I know we're building that. But to have those teeth in those procedures also. And throughout the process of gaining the information and the pitfalls that you're finding from your predecessor, to make sure that all of that information is in there. Because it truly is a disgrace what we have done to this cemetery and, frankly, to what I'm finding in the VA. And I know, being briefed by the VA people, that you guys are working very closely together because you have a lot of similar problems, and to share those experiences. And I hope we can work together on that aspect, because I know how a lot of this works. This is my problem, that's their problem. No, it's the American people's problem. It's our soldiers, it's our taxpayers at the end of the day. And there are people that need to be held accountable, and I think as a committee we have to find a way to do that. And I applaud you all for your efforts here, but there is a lot of things that it hurts. It hurts people every day when these loved ones call up and say, I don't know if my loved one is buried where you say they're buried. And there are some of them that we can't even prove. It's heartbreaking to have to go through that kind of stuff. So I know we have our arms around it. I think we truly, and I'll say it again, sink our teeth into it and make sure that this never happens again. And I thank you all for your testimony, and Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much for your heartfelt comments, Mr. Runyon. And at this time, Unless there's any further question, we shall again thank the witnesses for being here. Thank you for making a difference. Again, Arlington, the shrine of our country, the respect that we have for service members, military families, veterans, this is so important. And would like now to proceed to Mr. Whitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd also like to thank the witnesses. I think there are a couple of things here that all of us on the committee would like to know today. I think Mr. Cooper brings up a great point about accountability and about past actions, current investigations. I think all of us feel like a sufficient amount of time has passed where those investigations should have reached their conclusion. There should be findings and there should be actions. So I know that our committee would expect from you, General Vangel, and from you, Ms. Condon, some indication about where that is. And I realize it may not be under your direct jurisdiction. I realize there's probably internal investigations within the Army, but I'm sure that you can pass on to the Army leadership there that I think both of our committees would like a definitive answer as to where that goes on. And I realize Mr. Cooper's frustration because at our last meeting, at our last hearing, the same questions were asked about when we could expect findings and actions. And as Mr. Cooper pointed out, it's been a long time. And I think all of us think it's very reasonable that a conclusion should have been reached by this particular point in time. So I hope that that comes back to both of our committees so we understand where things are. I think that's an extraordinarily important question. We've talked about some of the nuts and bolts today. That is one of those efforts hanging out there that I think leaves us all in a very uncomfortable position. I thank Mr. Cooper for bringing it up. I know it's a difficult but a very, very important issue for this, and we look forward to hearing something definitive back from the Army as to where that is. And with that,
I believe General Vangel wanted to comment on that.
Yes, yes.
Yes, Congressman, if I could.
Please.
As we went through the investigation for what we had with the two outstanding issues, the urns and gravesite reservations in particular, as we move forward, we look at violations of policy, guidance. If it's criminal, we hand it over to the Criminal Investigation Division. They have completed their investigations with the Department of Justice now. So that is the decision, and that is what we are told in the Army. They are making the determination on prosecution. So what we'll do is we'll do the best we can to get information from them, and we can we'll provide that to the committee. But ultimately, right now, it's under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice.
I think that would be great if you could let us know when CID passed it over to the Justice Department and who it is with there, so these committees can communicate with the Justice Department to get from them an idea about time frames.
Absolutely can, sir. We'll do that.
In fact, I look forward to working with Chairman Whitman and our ranking members too, in regard to possibly CID and DOJ officials to come and let us know what the status is, because this would be beyond your purview, but this is, there should be accountability, and we can't proceed without it.
Yeah. And I think, too, another thing to take from today that I ask all of you to consider, I think the suggestion that the leadership chain include somebody in uniform to make sure the Uniform Code of Military Justice is something that reigns with that is something that is a very, very significant suggestion, one that as strategic planning and organization plans are looked at, that I think it's something that garners your serious consideration. I want to thank Mr. Kaufman for bringing that up.
Any further? If not, we shall be adjourned. Thank you again, everyone, for being here today. Yeah, no.